Hello, Gosia.
Hello, Camila.
We are on. Welcome to my
We
podcast.
are
I'm
on.
so happy to have you here. I don't know if I could be
Me
more
too.
excited.
Ah,
And,
I
I
think
need
I'm more
to.
excited.
Thanks. And I think I need to tell the story to the listeners how we
Okay.
met. I think it was in the beginning of the year when I connected with you on LinkedIn. And
Yeah.
that was because I came across your YouTube profile doing some research for my instructional design
Oh.
PL podcast. And I immediately connected to you on LinkedIn. And fast forward, I don't know, 3 to 4 months, I see you on the list of new hires where we work. And then I
Yeah, correct.
volunteered to be your buddy. And I'm like, oh my God, is that a coincidence? Could I be more lucky? It's
It was meant to be.
yeah, it's a small world,
It
right?
was meant to be. Yeah,
Of
that's true. I didn't
instructional
know
design.
you. I didn't know you discovered my YouTube channel. I'm blushing.
Yeah, I didn't want
It's
to
interesting.
make you blush, and I don't want to sound like a huge expert on Gosia Pytel. So why don't you? I'm a big fan,
It's a good one.
but why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little something about how you started in instructional design?
Of course. Sure. And to be honest, I don't think I'm an expert on Gosia Pytel, to be honest, because things change so very quickly. And even my ideas change very quickly. What I do know is, I think that was mentioned already. My name is Gosia. I'm originally from Poland. For the past 4 years, I've been doing instructional design and design thinking outside of Poland, in Northern Ireland and the Netherlands. And generally what I do is instructional design from analysis technically to evaluation as
Mm-hmm.
well, even though it's more focused on analysis now and design. And at the same time, I'm doing workshops in design thinking. I had a few projects that I was doing with the methodology of design thinking, and that's one of my great passions. I
Mm-hmm.
can see how it changes teams, how it changes projects, how it changed me. So that's definitely on the same level as design thinking and my passion for e-learning. And that's the core of Gosia Pytel.
That's fantastic because design thinking and instructional design are somewhat connected and combined. And I think a lot of instructional designers are longing for maybe another tool than Eddie, another framework, maybe
Mhm.
another useful tool that could help them for those discovery phases, maybe to be more fun or interactive with the client. So according to you, when did it become popular for those two arenas to combine and merge together? And what is your experience with that?
I think in terms of popularity, it did change when design thinking started to kind of be more recognized in different communities. But that's more connected with the word and the buzzword and how it kind of grew in need to be used. But in terms of the methodology and thinking behind it, I think that was already happening before. We just didn't know the name for it. And it's obviously not one-to-one. There are differences and there are different ideas behind. But in terms of what it does on each stage, like if you kind of map design thinking with ADI or if any other
Mm-hmm.
with any other process, to be honest, you can see a lot of similarities. And I think people were doing that before we knew the name of design thinking. And obviously the difference is that the structured approach is slightly different. But I'm convinced that there are people that still don't know the word design thinking and they're doing exactly that. And obviously at the same time, design thinking is the word design really kind of misleads people
Mm-hmm.
to understand that it's actually connected with graphic design or
Okay.
pictures and anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But even with graphic design and UX design, they when design thinking became popular, I heard voices of, oh, we've been doing that with Double Diamond and we've been doing that in UX, we've been doing that in graphic design, like this is what you do when you
Mm-hmm.
come to your client and all that. And I think obviously that's true. And I think the difference is that you don't really need the name for it. You just need the idea behind it. But because we have a popular name, more people are
Mm-hmm.
getting more ideas. And I think that's beautiful, in also in just the fact that things are interchangeable, and you can kind of learn um,
Mm.
from different sides.
And speaking of, trying to cross-reference and those two approaches, for me, empathy, define, ideate. I think they are connected to the analysis that you have in the Eddy model. For me, the empathy, define, ideate, I think there, if you would be to cross-reference design thinking and Eddy model, I think they belong to analysis, right? So would you mind kind of break down those three phases and what they mean and how you work using those with your stakeholders?
Sure, for sure. Definitely the first stages will go to analysis, because you want to emphasize with people, you want to connect with people. Yes, got it. Want to connect with people to find out the background of their problem. Like, we both know this, and probably your listeners will have this idea in their head as well, that not necessarily the problem that people come to you with is the problem that needs to be solved. There might
Mm-hmm.
be, root cause analysis is one of the ways
Mm-hmm.
in business that people use to kind of find what is the basis of the problem. So this is where you connect, and the same thing you do with analysis in ADI. You want to find out if the need is the correct need, and if you're going to design materials and design courses for the specific goal in mind, and if the goal is actually true. So definitely they kind of go together. And defining, and the stage of defining the problem, it's kind of refinement of empathy stage. So you're trying to figure out, you don't want to cover too many bases with your ideas. So you're trying to define on the basis of your information. So for example, of the basis of your TNA, you
Mm-hmm.
would define the specific purpose of the material that you're creating, or in case of design thinking, the workshop you're doing, or whatever's happening. So definitely they go together. Something that I see more on the side of design thinking than I see on the side of ADI, and there's lots of things to blame for it, is that design thinking is definitely more iterative. So that empathy stage, defining stage, kind of, you can say it appears in other stages as well. The perfect picture would be that it goes in circles, but the circle interconnects. So you can go from later stage. You don't have to go further. You can go back. And if
Mm-hmm.
you find out that something's not going right, you can go back to empathy stage. You can go back to the definition stage and kind of refine it. Whereas in Eddie, I feel that more of the time we go the first circle, and if we want to correct something, we go back to analysis instead
Mm-hmm.
of stopping, like the Toyota way, stopping the production line, going back. Instead of doing that, we kind of waste time, I feel, a lot of times, to come back to analysis. So those will be the differences, but there's definitely a lot of crossover.
Yeah, and I think design thinking allows for the space for people to co-create. So if you're an
Yeah,
instructional
for sure.
designer and maybe you're in the team of few instructional designer on a project, maybe that is allowing you to co-create between the instructional designers, or maybe it allows to create with your client. And for me as instructional designer, I always kind of second doubt myself, because
Hmm.
there's this fine line between how much you give and how much you take from your stakeholders. So I was wondering,
True.
what is your take on that? How do you facilitate the process so people don't feel, okay, but what is your role and what is your job, right? If I'm giving you everything, so what will you do
Yeah,
with that? So if you could
I
speak to that.
see. I see. Definitely one of the mindsets behind design thinking is interculturality, and it's really based on the idea that we all have different points of view and we see things differently, and it can be as subtle as being from the same city but from two different districts. You'll be brought up in in slightly different cultures still, and obviously your family and your background and everything. So if you combine a lot of points of view, you're gonna have more. It's like kind of doing 360. Like the more pictures you take around, the more crisp the picture will be, and it's sort of the same idea. So to address that, definitely something that happens more on the workshops of design thinking, because we have people from different parts of the company, different countries and all that. And I think that idea is already on the level of being accepted in different businesses. Previously, it was like, oh, CEO and someone, and they've been doing brainstorming. Now, I think it's more, the posted kind of idea. This picture is more recognized, and people are accepting that, oh, we have to do a workshop. Uh, in terms of the sort of border, what do you give and what do you take? It might be, obviously, if you talk to different people, they might give you a different answer. For me, one of the core values in the empathy stage, and even in define, and really in the entire process, but in those two stages, most importantly, is saying what I think is true, being honest, asking lots of questions, and not being afraid to ask the wrong questions. And I know it sounds like a phrase that we kind of repeat, oh, like dig in, be, challenge the status quo and all that. But you really need to be drilling people to find out what is their point of view in terms of what they really think is valuable. Because I think we all were in a situation when the subject matter expert had 200 slide presentation. And when you ask them what is important, they say, well, everything. I mean, I don't know how to choose. And I think asking them questions, what is, like, really digging deeper, using 5 why techniques. Like, why do you think that's important? Oh, because blah, blah, blah. Oh, but why? Because, and then you drill deeper and you try to figure out what is on the basis of it. And I think really, I mean, sometimes, I'm not going to say I made enemies, but I think sometimes people left conversations feeling a little bit sour, because I'll be really honest in a way that I'll be like, well, I don't see the point behind it, and I'm sorry, I'm telling you this, I know it's your area of expertise, but if you see the point, explain it to me in the way that you would explain it to a 5-year-old kid, more or less, right? So I think that honesty also in the idea of explaining why you're doing things, and you explain that, yes, we could use 200 slides, but the effect will be this and this and this, and they're all a negative. But if we get the gist of it and then we model it, and our audience is like this, and they like this, and they really like videos, but they don't like talking, explain it to it. I think that really opens eyes of everyone involved in the project. And that's what happens to me when I work. Sometimes it's a heavy conversation, because we also have differences, and it's really hard to look past those. And we work with people with different ages, so like it's a different conversation with someone who's 60 than with someone who's 28, which is weirdly enough even weirder for me. But I think the trust that you build at the very beginning with empathy and with questions, and with really trying to explain why you're doing this, really builds a good rapport with people. And then you can come back to them and explain what's missing or what is needed, things like that. Another practical thing that I would do, it's not really related with design thinking that much, but I would definitely make sure that we end up being on the same page with people. So communication really is key here, because we can have ideas, or we can think that we agreed on the same thing, but unless it's written down, and it kind of sounds soulless, but unless it's written down and we can go back, the conversation later on changes, and you think you have that honesty, but there is some kind of, because I thought differently, and now you're coming to me and you're accusing me or whatever. But if you have it written down, that honesty is also rooted in what we agreed on. And I think that drives the project forward in that department as well.
Yeah, so. And maybe that also requires a little bit of a mindset change for people who came the path of becoming instructional designer, but first being SMEs on different projects. And maybe they have maybe imposter syndrome kicks in,
Exactly.
of kind of
Exactly.
something like, oh, I probably need to be an expert to be able to do my instructional design work on this. So it's a mindset change and also a way to work with your SMEs. So
That is,
mm.
you're correct. You're spot on. That has a lot of influence. True.
Yeah. So what we are doing, we are trying to empathize, and empathize with whom? It's not about our stakeholders or SMEs at the end of the day, but with the learners, right?
Yes,
And
correct.
that's where another buzzwords comes to me. It's the human-centered design.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in the instructional design realm is now talking about human-centered design. So what does that look like? How does that work according to you?
I must say that the idea behind this is sort of similar to the idea behind design thinking being already used. I think if you're just creating materials and you don't really care, then obviously that doesn't happen. But if you're an instructional designer, if you create products for someone, I think the idea of human-centered design is somewhere. It might have not been popular because we were more focused on our values than values of our customers, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's definitely present in e-learning already, because you are creating, as you rightfully said, for learners, we're creating not for ourselves, for learners. So I think there's also a lot of similarities. And to me, really the human-centered design, that really is just one mindset that
Mm-hmm.
you need to keep. And you need to always think about people that you're creating it with. Sometimes you forget, yes, but also if you develop more empathy, you kind of always think about other people than yourself. So I think that kind of becomes natural. And I think that that name is also interchangeable with like design thinking or with other methodologies, because it's not that design thinking is like only design thinking is human-centered. Like instructional design for me would be human-centered because I'm creating for a human.
Yeah.
And I also heard lots of comments about like it's not a user, it's a person, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, I think that it is a mindset that you need to keep in mind, and I think the trick might be to that you forget from time to time. So it's just a habit that you need to figure out how to kind of stick to, and just think. And I think most of instructional designers, if like we all know, we're creating for learners. So I think fortunately for our business, it's more prevalent than any other idea behind it.
So another interesting component of human-centered design and design thinking for me is the learners' interviews, because Eddie model is not talking about that. So I was wondering if you could tell us, because I never worked with that, I never had a chance to locate or to spend time with the learners. I was never given any contacts to
I see.
ask questions about their environment and the ways of working. So I was wondering, how does that work and what is the must-have
Right.
for that
I see.
process to actually work, and so it benefits your design. So it's not just a connect, talk, and nothing happens. So what do you need to do? How do you need to set this up so it helps you with your design?
I think before any interview, and I kind of take the interviews from user experience and mainly user experience research, because that's where you utilize them the most, and that's kind of how, because user experience research is also one of my passions, so that's how I kind of amalgamated the two. And that's how I started being part of them for different projects, and that's how I kind of came to the possibility to use them myself. And it is quite a path, that to go from stage zero to having or doing an interview, because something that I didn't know at the beginning of my road is that the way how you conduct your interview, the questions that you ask, have a tremendous influence on the outcomes. And if you do it incorrectly, the outcomes will skew your whole process, and then you'll have a completely different results. And I think that's one of that's one of the reasons why it's so, to me at least, so difficult. And that's why I spend a lot of time crafting those, because I don't want to have wrong results. Before really digging into it, there is no other way to get better but practice. So if anyone is interested, I would suggest do some research on how to ask questions. I'll mention something in a second, but do some research and start interviewing your husband, your kids, your friends, and just find a topic and try setting up a dummy interview with people that you know, and just get analyze the results afterwards, and that will get you from 0 to hero. I would definitely suggest doing research and even signing up for some kind of a short course or something like that, because I remember when I did my first one, the only thing I could remember after the interview was how much I didn't know. I was like, oh my, I thought it was going to be a conversation. But first of all, this conversation doesn't have a script. So if you're not quick in your thinking, and if you don't really have the idea why you're interviewing people in your mind, if someone is not very talkative and they answer in short sentences, you're going to be stuck thinking, that's not the answer I was expecting. I don't have a script for how to react to what that person just said. And that happened to me. I was like, I don't know, like it was supposed to be 10 minutes, but we're only minute 4 and I don't really know what else to do. So that's a very big trap. You don't want people to, like, you want people to feel comfy enough and taken care of enough so they actually give you their darkest, deepest secrets concerning the subject, right? So, and as much as you should give them breaks to articulate their thoughts, you don't want to have a conversation when there are like clearly visible blanks in the conversation. And the second big problem with interviews, and something that I had, and I can assume pretty safely that a lot of people can struggle with that, is there's lots of different types of questions and errors that you can make with those questions. So for example, like I think we know that you can ask open and closed questions, and we kind of all know that. But I think I knew this before. Honestly, maybe it happened somewhere in high school or university. But at this level, you go to work, you kind of stop thinking about all the stuff that you learned earlier on, and you just focus on your work, and you forget. So maybe I forgot this, and I'm pretty sure some other people forgot this too. Is that, for example, you can ask a question in a way to suggest certain answer or certain feeling, and that already skews the results. So you need to be aware of how to ask the question. So it's not only interview as in, oh, hey, you, come on in, we're gonna have a chat. Like you need to have those questions, which, by the way, the foundation of that is your general research questions. So you need to know what you're trying to find out and how you're going to find out, but also not in a way that the questions are asked in a way to support your thesis. You need to know the full spectrum, because also one of the mistakes, and something that I was susceptible to, was asking questions that will actually support my idea, which is not a good way of finding the truth. So that needs a little craft. But I do think, and I try to promote it in every place that either I work at or every client that I have, to actually go and talk with people. And research shows from Nielsen Group that you basically need between 5 and 10 people. 5 is a good number to already find, like, for example, if you're doing if you're checking your website, research shows that 5 people is already enough to find about 80% of mistakes that you have on the website. So, if you find out what is the scare that people in your company, in your project, in your team have between talking to people, you can find out the answer of how to approach this. And I think one of the things that prevent people from doing that is money or time spent, because, like, I guess people think that you need to interview hundreds of people to have a clear view, which is not true. It might change. From my experience, it's quite hard to also kind of break the barrier between we're talking to customers, to learners, because we're basically doing it for you. Because still a lot of, especially older people, they have this mindset of, oh, no, like we, in front of our clients and our learners, we want to appear like we know everything, which I think that goes back to honesty and empathy to me as well. I think the more we show people that we need you and like your opinion matters, and we don't know everything, and that's why we're asking, I think that even creates a better line between the team or the company, whatever we want to call it, and learners. So to me, that's quite important. It's not to say that I was able to do it in every single place that I worked at or with every single client. But if you do have that opportunity, totally recommend.
I love what you said about empathy, and because I think it can help aspiring instructional designers to actually drive those conversations and handle themselves in those tough situations where you need to convince your stakeholders or sponsors that you want to talk to someone from the business, that you want to talk with some learners to check your ideas, because we want to be advocates of those cool methodologies, right? And I also love what you said about dummy interviews. That's a great advice. I think a lot of people are so afraid to be exposed, and that comes in the way of actually going and trying. So a little bit of research and maybe a little bit of practice, like dress rehearsals or something like that, maybe can help.
And I think that empathy that we're also talking, maybe that wasn't clear from our conversation, but I think that empathy, especially for in the example of interviews, it goes both ways. It's not only your empathy as in, I want to know what you're feeling and I want to know what the learner is doing and whatever, but you need to also have empathy for yourself. So allow yourself to feel stressed. Allow yourself to have a little thinking session at the end of or after the interview. Allow yourself to like accept all those emotions as well. And that's not to say to like go and I don't know, do some crazy stuff unless you want to, but just accept the fact that it is weird for people. It is going to be a little bit stressful for everyone, for you as well. So don't try to be the hero, or don't try to be, oh no, I know how to do an interview and go in. It's natural. It's a false environment. Let's face it. Especially like if you can see someone face to face, that's slightly better. But in a Zoom conversation, like it's gonna be weird for everyone. So if you accept and if you empathize with yourself as much as you do with your learner or your interviewee, it's gonna be, so it kind of goes further. It goes towards like your mental health and therapy topics. Like you're allowed to feel stressed on that interview as well. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, because allowing some grace for my own self is something I learn every single day. So thank you so much for saying that.
I think I learned that mostly from design thinking, because I think it's one of the ideas that we all have in our minds somewhere, but lives are like, you have kids, you have work, you have doctor's certificates to fill out or shopping to do, and still you have this approach that you want your life to be perfect, especially if you have kids. Like I see this with my best friend. She has 2 kids and everything needs to be perfect. I'm like, it's better to spend time with them a little bit. Obviously, like it's easier said than done, but generally it's better if you like one weekend if you don't clean your apartment one weekend, but you have a play with your kids. And I think the same goes to, it's like taking care of yourself, and I think that's quite important. I'm really glad that this topic is also getting more recognition, like generally mental health and like going to therapy, which everyone is okay to do, and it's okay to take care of yourself. And I love this. I love that it's happening.
Thank you. And just to still talk about the interviews, I'd like to go to some nitty-gritty of of that process, and if you could talk or speak to how much you need to disclose to your learners about the planned design, so you can talk to them and ask the right questions.
That really depends on the case as well, because you can have generally you can also have that interview on different stages. Most commonly at the beginning, you'll interview people to find out, and you can create personas, you can create their journey, and have that information to design your materials or design your project. You can also have that interview when you have your first prototype, so you can test some features. I think it depends. My worry would be that if you disclose the design or your idea, you might be steering people towards that, and they suddenly will stop thinking about whatever they want or they feel. They'll just look at your product, not prototype, but that's before. They'll just think about the design and start focusing. So you won't be really interviewing. If you're at the stage of finding information, you won't really be interviewing for information. It'll be more like checking if the design is correct or incorrect. So I don't think I would do that part. I think at the very beginning of the road, I usually focus on finding out what their needs are, how their day is, what they do in their free time, what are their pain points, so I can have a picture and I can see what part of the material I'm designing. Obviously, that will be tailored to the situation, right? Sometimes you don't really have to know their day. But on the basis of that information, I think I will think about my design. Because when I have people that only work on laptops, obviously I won't be thinking about mobile design. So I will know where to focus my design. And sometimes if you have pain points, and you know that they have, like, even such simple information as I only have 10 minutes a day to do my learning, that already gives you information that you need to chunk in a certain way for them to and design the space between each, like, 10-minute interval. So I wouldn't really think about, like, you can have your design in your mind, but also remember about the trap not to ask questions to confirm your design. But it's more about finding what their habits are, how they behave, where they learn, what they do. And then on the basis of that information, you can create more. And it's worth also not only to do the interview, but also create persona. And I think more people will know already what personas are. You just have create, like, the example of your learning or target audience or your learner. And if you have their journey as well, depending on what you're designing, that can help as well. So definitely not only interview. And if you can, by the way, I was just thinking that if you can do the interview, even trying to put yourself in their shoes can be helpful. Obviously, again, a trap could be that you can be using too much of your own experience. But if you have questions from your TNA, and it's like the demographic information, there is the hobbies information, like sometimes you can imagine some stuff in terms of your learners, so that's helpful as well.
I think for the most part, everybody needs to figure out on their own what is their groove with those interviews. I think it would be fantastic if you could see few people and kind of look behind their shoulders on how they do that. But again, at the end of the day, you need to, like you said, tailor it to your own solution and make it your own, and actually, own it and be confident.
That's true.
I know it takes time and it's hard and it's deliberate practice, but I think it will slowly bring the confidence.
Definitely. It's one of those things that you need to trust the process, so to speak, so you're going to put some work before you get to take the fruit and make a juice.
Yeah. And in speaking of confidence, I think, at least it's my opinion, the ultimate proof of a confident person is to speak at a conference.
Okay, interesting thought.
Before, like, 100 people, maybe 1,000 people, and share your knowledge.
Okay.
I know you have a great speaking career. I saw your portfolio is so impressive. So many events speaking about instructional design, teaching, and everything. I'm like, whoo! How do you do that? Can you share a little bit?
I'm not really sure if that's an ultimate proof. Maybe it doesn't look like that from a different perspective. I think for me personally, it stems from, I mean, I generally like talking, and which is, and I
Okay.
like,
Lucky me.
yeah, depends on the point of view, I guess. But I like talking because, and I wasn't always like that, but I think ever since I started traveling, I noticed that you can read books about a certain place, but there's no better way. Obviously, they're still helpful, and I'm not negating that, but there's no better way than live the adventure. So when I started traveling and I started meeting people from different places, and they would tell me their stories, um, that's when I realized that if you want to grow, and if you want to do something with your knowledge, you need to exchange your ideas with other people. And I mean, at the end of the day, what good is, like, how, like, knowledge doesn't really have um, any sense if you're not sharing it with anyone. Because if you only keep it for yourself, what is the goal for that? Which might be against some of the ideas, because I know that the rat race is still a thing, and it's okay, like, in terms of taking care of your own life and blah blah. But I noticed that, and I think people are afraid in terms of sharing knowledge in business. They're afraid that someone will take their idea and make a business out of it. And my approach to this is, if they're going to create a business and be more successful, they'll do it with your idea or without. So it doesn't really matter. And if you have an idea and and you share them and they did something with it, I think the only comment to that is, well, you didn't do anything with it. So maybe it's worth considering, spreading the ideas, but also working on it. Like, even instructional designers, it's not like there's a clique of 5 for the entire world. Like, so even if you share your idea, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have work or anything like that. So that's one approach that I have. Another approach is, I'm just a really inquisitive person. I want to know everything, which is a blessing, of course, at the same time. But I want to know everything. And to me, even in books, I like books that have dialogue. I don't like a lot of description, because when the characters talk, I find out stuff. So I would always start a conversation and try to figure that out. And I love myself going to conferences, because at the end of the presentation, you can go to the speaker and you can exchange your ideas, and not only give them new information and new ideas, but I can build on that myself. And that's also one of the design thinking kind of approaches, that you build on ideas of others. Again, you can have a better product. Better product, because you have different views. So so that's the second thing, to exchange information and kind of have more inspiration for ourselves. I think the third reason to do it in general is getting motivation to change things, because even I found out that at some point I started doing the same ideas in my scenarios, the same kind of stories, and then you can have inspiration from other things. But to me personally, and it might be different for different people, to me there's nothing better than talking to other people. And at some point I decided to share maybe some of my ideas, and that required a little work, because you already mentioned imposter syndrome. I think that's something that we actively need to fight against. It doesn't just disappear at some point. Maybe it does for some people. It didn't for me. There are still moments when I'm like, well, do I really have something to say? But I think for me personally, I see myself as quite a sunny, open-minded person. And I think never had a problem with having that conversation with anyone. And I think that also creates, if you can create an atmosphere when people share, that's also good. And I think, and if you have passion if you can kind of convey that passion with your speaking. So it took a little fight for me to do the first one, but I thought I had a good idea. I asked my friends, and that's how I did the first one. I think building community is also another part that comes with speaking and with having conversations and presentations, because you can always ask someone for help, but if you have that connection with someone because you were at the conference together, at least you already know you're in the same mindset for topics and stuff. So if anyone is kind of on the verge of deciding, there's really, I mean, there's really nothing that you're gonna lose, because if you're going to do it, you learn something about yourself. It's worth to get some feedback on how you present yourself. If you do have people in the audience that you can ask, or if you can do a survey at the end, and it's all also making you better. It's sharing ideas with other people, but it's also making you better. And I think that's a great idea to make, in some cases, the world a better place. Taking and giving, and it's kind of like it. I don't know. I kind of like that idea.
Yeah, I really love how you described it, from the high level purpose of sharing the knowledge and maybe changing the world for the better. And I think a lot of the things that you mentioned are directly connected to your career, like networking.
For sure, you're absolutely right.
Like upskilling yourself. But I was wondering if that also, apart maybe also from your personal branding, right? Because when you show those events in your portfolio, I think it boosts it like 100% or maybe 1000%, because a lot of people are not courageous enough to step up and speak, and they admire those people who actually have the balls to do it. So I was wondering if that helped you maybe to find a job, or maybe did it make any pivotal shift in your career that you could maybe share with the listeners?
Honestly, I don't know, because now that you said it, I never thought about myself like that anyone can be out there thinking about me this way. But I do think about but that's the interesting thing, because I do think the same about other people speaking. So maybe that's also part of that imposter syndrome. I'm not really sure if that helped me find a job. I can't speak for that. Never really came up in conversations with in a job situation. But I think it definitely helped me get projects outside of my job, or be part of some pro bono initiatives. And maybe also, like, the more you do it, the more people will be open to accept you as a speaker. Recently, something that is really interesting for me, after one of the online kind of conferences, and that was interesting because it was like a synchronous conference. One of the organizers contacted me to support her in writing like a scientific scholarly paper. So I'm now a published author, which is interesting because I really didn't do much. It only is like half a page that I contributed. But just thinking that, like, in terms of opportunities, even in that kind of dry land of opportunities, that would never happen if I didn't participate in that event. And it also kind of boosts your own confidence. And I think, coming back again to the imposter syndrome, I think we're all doing great stuff. We just don't really have enough trust in ourselves. And I think that also kind of, not that we should need other people's approval, but let's face it, it does work and it does matter to us. And I think that's also great.
Yeah, I think if somebody's on the fence, like thinking, should I or should I not do it, I would encourage them, because, putting yourself out there for your career, I think
definitely. And like, if you really think about it, and that comes for me from design thinking really as well, what's the worst that could happen is one question. Like, and people can say no, and that's it. And if you're worried, you don't have to tell anyone that you're applying to speak. So no one will even find out that anyone said no, if that's something that kind of stops you. And even if they say no, there's so many other events, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people high up that we look up to that someone said no to, Because it doesn't happen. Like, I still, like, you say all the superlatives about me speaking, but there's still tons of events that say no, and like, okay, that's fine. Like, that's part of, and that's part of a failure as well. If you get to say no and you have the opportunity to ask for feedback, at least you're gonna change for the better for future, and that's another class of applying. And really, like, the worst thing that is stopping us from doing anything is just doing that. I feel that even in personal life, if I leave the house, then I'll do whatever I want to do. But if I'm in the house, I'm like, oh, maybe tomorrow. So it's kind of the same mechanism. Yeah, so definitely do it. Yeah, definitely do it.
Yeah, and speaking further on your career and myself looking at your portfolio and your CV, I think a very strong point and what makes you very competitive on our local job market is that you worked both in Poland and also abroad. So that's a couple of reasons that makes you competitive. You kind of are exposed to, global audiences, global environment, but also the language. I think people who can speak the language, or at least one like English, they, to be very honest, they will make more money if they apply for those jobs in the global corporations or things like that. So I was wondering, what is your experience, and what would you describe as pros and cons of working abroad and working in Poland?
It definitely also needs to be prefaced with the information that it will be different again for everyone, and that's very important to remember, because working in a different country also comes with most probably moving to a different country, because obviously we can work online, but it's completely different, and I had no idea that was different before I actually moved to a different country. It also needs a little, I guess, bravery is the word, because you are gonna start more or less from scratch, because you don't really have friends. You need to start making friends at work. You need to kind of organize your life. So from that perspective, it needs to be a good decision, and you need to be brave enough to do it. But that's besides the point. In terms of the job market, I do value different points of view in different cultures, and I worked previously, obviously, as we all, in a multinational corporation, and I thought that having this one meeting every Friday, I thought that this is my knowledge of how to work with other people from different countries. And yes, there is some truth in it. I still was able to craft an email in a certain way and kind of approach people in a certain way. But in terms of creating good working conditions and atmosphere, that is definitely not the case. So to me, going somewhere and being part of not only the work, the meeting that we have 1 hour, but also what happens after the meeting is over, how they exchange ideas, how they work together. It's not only more knowledge for me to work differently, and definitely helps when you have projects with the country that you lived in. But it also gives me, again, motivation and new ideas of maybe what to change and what worked, what didn't work in other situations. I remember that working when I moved to Northern Ireland, we have this picture of Irish people to be all jolly and happy and drinking their Guinness in pubs, and that's true, of course. But if that was my impression of their working, it wasn't 100% true. They're very dedicated to the work. And yes, we joke and we have our laughing times, but they're very detailed. And if they have a job to do, they will do it. And that was something interesting for me. Coming from that background of, you come, like in Ireland, you go to a pub, and people that visited Ireland, they hopefully will confirm that. But you go to a pub, and it doesn't really take a lot of time to start talking with people that you don't know. And that kind of connection and friendliness that they have, for example, transfers to your teamwork as well. So that was, for example, to me, that was interesting for one, but it was kind of eye-opening because I didn't know that you can have that close connection with people that you work with. And I'm pretty sure people in Poland and in other places have friends from work, but I never really, before I did that, I never really had friends from work. It was friends from work at work, but when I changed jobs, we didn't really stay in touch. But here, it was different because we were really friends at work and we could be honest. There was definitely more empathy. So for example, if you're asking about what are the pros and cons, definitely one good thing is that you're learning new ways of working with people, but you also get to be more open to either the good things or the flaws that other people can have and that you have. So things that the person that you are kind of changes because you see that your view of the world is not the only view of the world. And I don't think you can get this if you work with other countries like online or even if they visit once a month. I only think that's possible, but that might be only my idea. But I think that's only possible if you kind of do total immersion in the workplace and in the culture of the place. The con, on the other hand, is that the progress and the work that you do on yourself and the ideas that you get in one place might not be applicable in another. And you might try to express it, but it still might not be so easy to do it. And it also comes in with people are different managers and all that, so obviously there are different reasons for that. But one of the reasons is the cultural differences. They can make or break a conversation. But I think the awareness that you get in different countries to actually be aware that, oh, okay, so that's a person from the Netherlands, so there might be different. That's definitely a plus. And sometimes the ideas that you get from one culture and you are able to instill them in another team, in another culture, I think that's brilliant. For me personally, I like working in quite an honest environment, so we can admit our failures, but I can also talk to other person and discuss their failure, not in a way that, oh, you made a mistake, but in a way of, again, failure, we all get better on it. And in some ways, in some countries, you won't be able. That's what I learned in Northern Ireland. We were a super tight-knit group of people working together, and I was never able to do it in the Netherlands. And that's not to say that one way is worse or the other. It's just two different cultures, and if you can't do it, you need to kind of switch and figure out another way to also help yourself satisfy the things that you learned in a different country. So you also do a lot of work with yourself. That's a pro and a con at the same time. And I think you asked about coming back to Poland because I'm current.
Yeah, that was the other part of the question. Yes, if you see any dramatic differences, or if you would say that working in Poland, what is for Polish people that they need to catch up on comparing to other countries, maybe something like that. I was thinking, but if there isn't, that's fine.
Well, before I dig into that, what do you think? Because you are only your life is only in Poland, but you do have projects with people and you worked for different countries. What is your your way of? Do you see the difference? Even if what I'm describing, do you see the difference between working with them online?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of what we can learn as Polish people is this culture of giving and receiving feedback and how actually go about that. So I think, by exposure and by deliberate practice, we can learn that. But for me, it was a little bit of eye-opening when I worked at Volvo with Swedish people and other nationalities, the way they handle themselves and not in such a direct way are able to give you some development tips that will kind of encourage you but not cut your wings, which sometimes is a different of a night and day for new joiner, right?
That's true.
And I think there was this notion at Volvo, at least, that everybody really was happy not having a Polish boss. Everybody was more. Yeah, I cannot really speak to that. What is the reason? 100%, probably there are various reasons, but definitely there was this notion that people felt more accomplished, maybe felt more exposed, and there was a different vibe, maybe, of communication.
Right. No, that actually totally makes sense. I think that as much as generalization is hurtful, I think we as a country, we don't really talk about our feelings that much, and it transfers, in my opinion, to your work relations. It's sometimes like whatever the boss says or whatever the style of management is, it can come across as very abrupt and very like, you're not really a person to me, you're just an asset or you're an FTE. And I think that might be because we come from a culture of that sort. For example, I hope that changes, and it's different for different people. I have the tendency to remember some things that my mom said and my dad said when I only started working, because they're from the generation that it was harder to get a job, and if you had one, you kind of stuck to it. Mm-hmm. And my mom, I remember when I first went to, like, I was sick and I got the certificate to stay at home. And my mom was like, oh, don't do it too much because, no one's going to hire you because they'll think that you get sick all the time. And obviously, there's always one side of the story and people can misuse it. But at the same time, that notion behind makes work not to be a human to human interaction, but it's more like object to object kind of thing. And especially if you have an older boss that's still prevalent in their style, I think for younger people it changes, especially because we do work with other countries, and I see this changing. But I think for me, again, and it depends on, I know I said it multiple times already, but it still depends on the person, it depends on the manager you have, it depends on the team and everything. But my experiences are that a job here is more, it's more like an object to a lot of people instead of actually coming to work and being happy with what you do. It's a lot of times it's more just means to an end, which is fine if you're okay with this. But if you're a person that needs more, that might be harder to figure out. We definitely, something that you mentioned about giving and receiving feedback, and I see this now coming back after, I see this coming back to my mind as well, that sometimes I don't know if I should say something because I don't want to, like, obviously there's this, I don't want to lose my job, which I don't think is true anymore, but that's what I had from my parents kind of. But it's harder to figure out what level of honesty you can go for, and how this honesty is going to be perceived. Which is basically what you said, giving and if I could wish for something, it would be for people to forget that a lot of times, if not all the time, when it comes to work, the feedback is not directed to the person, but it's directed to the product. But I think we are so connected with our product being our baby as well, and just the fact that someone is giving feedback to us and you can't really speak to a product, I think that's really hard to separate. And I remember that actually happened in Northern Ireland, and it was a conversation with, or like a short team meeting with my managers from Germany and the Netherlands. So I was from Poland, being in Northern Ireland, which is a separate entity because it's technically UK, but it's more Ireland, and it's the whole cultural thing of that is the first thing to consider. Then we have Germany and we have the Netherlands. And I remember we were kind of talking about the dynamics within the team. And one thing that they said, it was based on a book as well from the former creative director from Pixar. And it was this idea of leave your ego at the door. So it's like if you're going into a meeting, your ego as in accepting everything as directed to you and critics to you personally, you leave that behind, because we're here at the meeting to work on a product. So nothing that we say is really deliberate towards a person, but it's all directed to make the product better. And no one is there to actually like, I don't know what the English way is, but like kind of undermine you. Everything that we say is to make the product better. It's really hard to do, because it's really, like I said, hard to separate, because if people are speaking to you, obviously you kind of take it personally. It's like saying, oh, don't take it personally, but I'm a person, so like it's hard to figure out. But if you think about it, and if you think, okay, he's talking about the website, and it's okay because he has a different point of view and I have a different point of view, that really helps too. And I wish we could adopt this in Poland as well. I feel like we do have this idea of, we're working in our own kind of way, and don't touch it, it's mine. And the more you kind of share it, the better. But it's really difficult to go there.
Thank you so much, Gosia. And I think I have a title for this podcast: "Leave Your Ego at the Door" by Pixar CEO.
Yeah, I think, that's closeness. That's I can recommend reading that book. It's a really good book. Deals a lot of with also failures as well, because they had problems with getting the movies to be recognized, and it's a really good book. So I could recommend that.
Yeah, so I think it's a good closure, good title for the podcast, and a word of wisdom from us both
definitely
to the listeners. So I'm, being mindful of the time here, and I'd like to thank you so much. It's been such a
thank you for allowing me to talk a lot, because
I appreciate your time and your willingness to talk to me. So thank you so much again, and see you again soon.
One more thing, if I can as well, is that if there are people who just want to chat in terms of design thinking or e-learning, you already know I like to talk and I like to exchange ideas. If anyone wants, has a question, then I'm there. You can put a link to my website as well somewhere, and
I think I will put some description under the video with your profile and your contact information.
All right. Awesome.
So everybody who is interested can reach out.
Thank you so much. It was lovely.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Bye bye.